மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.
E7, bishop d7, and sort of be stuck in this passive position. But I believe it should be easier to handle this line if we are armed with some direct ideas. So I have a variation that I'd like to show you here based on the early f6 pawn advance, immediately provoking conflict in the center and trying to go for piece activity. And the other line that we're going to start with here is quite a rare option, a very natural looking option, the move bishop takes c5, the immediate bishop takes c5. Now, right away I'm going to say the idea behind this move obviously is to regain the pawn, but also this knight in b8, it usually goes to the square in c6. Well, in this case, I'm going to delay that development because I may be able to use this knight to go to d7. However, the downside of playing bishop c5 right away, compared to playing knight c6 and attacking e5, is that after bishop c5, white gets some queen g4 ideas. These are quite rare, but also quite annoying to deal with. But first, let's look at what will happen after white simply continues his normal plan. b4, bishop b6, and now bishop b2. So this was this is a very natural continuation, and it was tested in a game between two very strong players. White was an international master, and black was a grandmaster. But again, as I've alluded to, the whole idea here, I want to delay knight c6. So I'm playing knight e7 here, which is what happened in the game. Now came that move knight f3 and a5. So immediately black is sort of provoking some weaknesses on the queen side, and we're immediately going for some active play. Now I'd like to just show you how this game went because it was very illustrative for everything black is hoping for in this variation, and I've also added some additional notes on this position in the accompanying PGS. Now in this game, after a5, white decided not to allow black potential exchanges and exchanging the rooks and maybe targeting this b4 pawn. So he played the immediate b5, which is a common idea in this line. White gains some space with the pawn on b5, but usually when white plays this move b5, he's chasing away knight at c6. In this position, knight is back home on b8, so this is perfectly fine for black. Now black played a very nice move, a move I like a lot, the move a4, which isolates the b5 pawn from the a3 pawn, so there's no really a4 ideas. But furthermore, this move also vacates the a5 square, so this bishop can potentially route itself to a5 in certain situations, basically just gains a little bit more space for black's pieces. Now, white continued normally with bishop to d3, and now black played knight d7. Again, the main point, the knight can slide to c5, which is a very nice outpost for the knight, and of course, afterwards, black's pieces will find simple squares like bishop d7 and rook c8. A couple more moves from this game went castles, knight c5, like we discussed. Now knight c3, bishop to d7. So I guess white decided to go knight c3 to add some extra protection to the b5 pawn because the a4 pawn sort of discontinued the connection between the a and b pawns. So bishop d7 was played in the game. Rook b1, rook c8. Black's pieces are all finding very good homes on the queen side. As always, we can consider options of bishop a5 at a good moment. Now, white played the move bishop to a1, adding extra protections to the b5 pawn. But again, usually white is going for all of this active play in this variation, so it's nice to see that he's sort of forced on the defensive here and has to concern himself defending the queen side. Knight g6 was played, a common maneuver for the knight to put pressure on the e5 pawn. And after knight e2, castles, black had a very nice position, all the pieces were developed, there's constant play on the c-file, and furthermore, after white g3, black immediately struck with f6, a very common idea here. It makes a lot of sense as this knight is pressuring the pawn on e5, and this rook and this bishop can combine quite well to put pressure on that file. So, if white was to take on f6, black would capture the pawn, and now gain a very strong center, potentially trying to push e5. So, white decided to take on g6 and then take on f6, but the resulting position I think is very good for black. It looks a little bit loose with these pawns, but after knight f4, for example, there's queen e8 or even bishop e8, and everything is well defended, and black has the two bishop advantage plus a very strong center and should be better here. So that is showcasing the main plan here after white plays b4, and of course, like I mentioned, we want to delay this this knight c6 move. Now, some other tries for white here, as I mentioned, include an early queen g4. We'll get to that in a second. Another thing I want to mention is that white can also sort of play a cat and mouse game with the move knight to f3, sort of waiting for us to maybe play knight f6. Again, we're going to delay that move. I want to play knight to e7. So if b4, bishop e6, we're just transposing and I'm able to play a5. So white may consider the move bishop d3 here, again, sort of tempting us to play knight c6 so that this knight can be a target. But I found an example here where black actually played a5, and this is a double-edged move. Of course, we stop b4, but at the same time we do weaken the b5 square. However, this is a trade-off that could be well worth it. I think white is doing quite alright in this position, but black's development here is quite simple. At this point, we don't have to worry about b4, so we can calmly play the move knight to c6. And just to showcase black's plans here, I'd like to look at this brief exit. White castled, knight went to g6, bishop g5 is played, so white couldn't find a role for the bishop in the long diagonal, so he puts it aggressively here. Black just goes back, captures, knight c3, bishop d7 to prevent any knight b5, knight to d6 ideas. Now white played queen to d2, castles, rook a1, and knight a6. So this position is quite fine for both sides. Both sides can be happy with how things are going. White is getting some free development. Free needs to play on the king side potentially. Pawn on e5 is strong, but black is sort of not under the typical pressure that some of these games have been in the a3 variation. This knight is going to c5. The rook can go to c8. And actually, playing white here is a very strong grandmaster who's close to 2,700. But despite that, he still lost his game to an opponent rated 200 points weaker, another grandmaster, 2,500 grandmaster. But it just goes to show that this position is, in my opinion, quite playable for black. Rook c8, knight c5 are coming, and I think black is doing completely fine here. So that's an idea to keep in mind. If white delays the move b4, and for example just tries to play like this, then you could even consider going a5 yourself, especially since some of white's most aggressive options, such as queen g4, have been nullified. Now, speaking of, as I mentioned, one of the critical plans here is that white could go queen g4 himself. So white could try going queen g4 in this position, but it's a little inaccurate because we can play a pawn sacrifice that is similar to the French defense, a variation called the widower poison pawn. We can play the move knight e7, and the point here is that after queen takes g7, we can play knight to g6, and actually white has to be careful because at the very least we can already go bishop f8, and that let's say something like knight f3, bishop f8, queen f6, bishop e7 can make a draw already, but we can even play for more aggressively here and try to trap the queen, or just delay this idea by playing knight c6 first and targeting the pawn. So the immediate queen g4 is a little bit imprecise here for white. But white, after knight e7, can actually try the move b4, which aims to prevent that bishop f8 idea I was talking about. But again, very much in the spirit of the poison pawn. We can play h5 here. And the idea is after we give up this pawn, rook g8, queen h7, we have the move bishop d4, collecting this pawn at e5. And we are going to lose the h5 pawn, but so we'll likely be down a pawn. But white is very uncoordinated on the queen side here. The rook is active on the g file. And black has a very strong center, and after, for example, queen c7, knight c6, or trying to castle long, or playing in the center, or playing with a5, it's a complicated position, but I believe black's chances are quite okay here due to our piece activity and strong center. So that is why the immediate queen g4 is not very precise. Instead, white should flip the move order a little bit and play the immediate b4. And now after bishop b6 that we looked at this, now queen g4 is a little bit more dangerous. The point is actually it's quite difficult to defend this pawn. King f8 loses castling rights, g6 weakens the dark squares. So those options could be tried, but I really want to make this move knight e7 work, again in the spirit of the poison pawn. Once more, if white takes on g7, then we're able to collect the central pawn. And again, the same principles apply here. We're down a pawn, but the compensation is evident in the active pieces, white's weakened queen side, and also the central control. So I think those unexplored lines are quite viable for black. At least they're complicated enough that even if our position could be objectively a little worse, they're quite complicated and give chances to both sides. Basically, the better player should come out on top. But maybe a more testing option here after knight f7 is actually not collecting this pawn, but playing knight f3. Of course, we're going to save this pawn with knight g6, and I feel like white should be more comfortable in this position. His pieces are quite active, but black has this like a very French defense style position. White can play a move like bishop b2, and I believe black's chances here really lie on the queen side. For example, we can play knight c6. Now, we're not really worried about this knight getting kicked back because we have the e7 square. So we can try to play for, a5, bishop d7, rook c8, but still white's pieces are quite good as well. This queen on g4 is well placed compared to d1, where it exerts pressure on the king side and center. So this variation is probably what white should do. It's quite rare, but still, objectively, I think white should go this road and enjoy a slight advantage. So, this is looking at the variation bishop takes c5 immediately. Like I said, again, if white plays normal stuff like b4, knight f3, then we'll be able to strike out with a quick strike with a quick a5, and then try to fight for the c5 square. But it does give white some interesting options based on queen g4. But in my opinion, these variations are not going to, if you play this variation against an opponent, they are very, very likely to just stick with ideas like b4, knight f3, bishop b2, because that is almost always the setup white goes for when playing a3. And they might not even realize they have this aggressive opportunity of playing queen g4. So bishop c5 is this rare option, this rare idea to avoid playing knight c6 that I could recommend testing out. But I've mostly done analysis of the move knight to c6. And the idea here is quite clear. I want to capture e5, so white is basically forced to play knight f3, and now after bishop c5, we have avoided white playing queen g4. However, the downside is that our knight and bishop can be vulnerable to this advance of the b pawn. So this is quite a critical position for the advanced Caro Kann here. As I mentioned, in recent times, black is not doing particularly well here, but I don't think his chances are all that bad, and in fact, this position is tricky for both sides, as I found out in my research. This is actually really a critical moment for white. Now, the most natural move is the move b4, continuing what white started with a3, trying to just expand on the queen side. And the reason I say it's a critical moment is because a lot of times white has also played the move bishop d3, which is a very natural option. It fits part of his scheme, but I believe this is imprecise here. And I've already mentioned a while back here that I like an approach from black involving a quick f6, make the game complicated and take the fight to the opponent early. And here I believe this move works really well. Now, of course, the center is under attack, so if white takes on f6, this is nothing to worry about. Knight f6, we're going to castle, and I've included an excerpt in the PGS showing how black can play. But basically, we have a lot of active pressure against our opponent's position, especially once this rook comes in. We have the center, white has to be on the lookout for e5 ideas, knight g4 ideas, attacking f2 and supporting f5. So we're not worried here, especially about white capturing on f6. But white's whole idea here is that he wants to play b4 and then bishop b2 to solidify control over the e5 square. However, in this case, we have a very surprising idea, or at least it was surprising to me. We can play the move bishop e7, and it's actually quite logical now that I look at it. The bishop is getting ready to route to f6 to challenge white's control of this diagonal. And if white plays the move bishop b2, as has been tested in the game, now we can continue with the move knight h6, very funky looking move. The idea is quite simple. We want to go knight f7 and just gain more control over the e5 square, and I believe black's chances here are quite good. And white should not allow us this option of retreating to e7. It's a very rare move, actually. Most games, black has just gone to b6 as normal, but this whole idea of meeting bishop d3 with f6 and then if b4, bishop e7 is quite effective here. So white is well advised to play the move instead of bishop d3, play b4. Now here my main recommendation is bishop b6. But you could try to set a trick, set a sort of like a positional trap for your opponents by playing this move, bishop e7. And again, the idea is if they play the move bishop d3, we can play f6. And this transposes to what we just looked at. But yeah, we can try to use this bishop to support f6. The problem here is that after bishop e7, white can profit with the move b5, which is much better. Now the knight is denied the e7 square, where it would likely retreat in case of b5. So this is sort of a little bit annoying, but on the other hand, we can play the move knight to a5. Oh, another annoying thing, of course, is that with the bishop on e7, this knight is hard to develop, but we see that there are possibilities to go knight h6 or f6 and then knight f6. So b5, knight a5, and now our plan should be playing bishop d7, rook c8, and maybe try to get this knight to c4. The bishop could actually come back to c5 and then allow knight e7. I think white's chances of the position should be preferable, but it's also playable for black. As I said, we have these plans at the queen side and on the c-file, and it also sort of sets a trap for our opponents. Go bishop e7, very unusual, and if they're not paying attention, we can hit with f6. In fact, even if they go bishop b2, we can play f6 here, and potentially even use that idea we just looked at. So instead, though, more to the point move is bishop b6. This is a move that we really want to make work. The bishop is quite aggressive on this diagonal, and we simply want to keep it there. As I mentioned, in this variation, white has a particular setup in mind. If not disturbed, he just wants to go bishop d3, bishop b2, castles, rook e1, defend that pawn on e5, get some pressure on the king side and the center, potentially followed with c4. And there's a bit of transpositions going on here at times because white can try to play some of these moves in various orders. But to keep things simple, I'd like to look at the move bishop b2 and branch from this.
மறக்காம சர்ப்ரைஸ் பண்ணுங்க. Thank you.